Olivia Parker had been a prison guard for exactly 18 minutes when she watched her first colleague beat an inmate unconscious, and she did absolutely nothing to stop it. The Stanford Prison Experiment had ended decades ago, but nobody had told the guards at Riverside Correctional that their behavior was being studied by Dr. Rebecca Lawson, a behavioral psychologist who had convinced the administration to let her observe how ordinary people transformed when given absolute power over others. Olivia had taken the job out of desperation after losing her position as a high school counselor, needing income to support her younger brother's medical treatments. She had always prided herself on being compassionate, fair-minded, and committed to helping people overcome their worst impulses. But standing in the concrete corridor of Block C, watching Officer Martinez slam his baton into an inmate's ribs while the man begged for mercy, Olivia felt something cold and calculating awaken inside her chest. The inmate, a thin man named David Chun, who was serving time for tax evasion, had apparently spoken disrespectfully to Martinez during morning inspection. Martinez's response was swift and brutal, and the other guards watched with expressions ranging from boredom to mild amusement. When Martinez finished and walked away, leaving Chun curled on the floor clutching his side, he looked directly at Olivia. "Welcome to the real world, rookie," he said. "These animals only understand one language." Olivia knelt beside Chun, her counselor instincts kicking in as she assessed his injuries and helped him to his feet. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something that disturbed her more than Martinez's violence. She saw fear, helplessness, and complete submission to her authority. Chun looked at her uniform, her badge, her keys, and immediately classified her as someone who could hurt him with impunity. The power dynamic was intoxicating in a way Olivia had never experienced. Dr. Lawson approached Olivia during her lunch break, introducing herself as a consultant studying prison management efficiency. "I noticed you helped inmate Chun this morning," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "That was very professional of you. How did it feel, being in that situation?" Olivia found herself unable to articulate the complex emotions she had experienced disgust at Martinez's brutality, but also a strange excitement at seeing another human being completely at her mercy. The rest of Olivia's first day passed in a blur of orientation procedures, security protocols, and psychological conditioning she didn't recognize as conditioning. The experienced guards taught her how to maintain emotional distance from inmates, how to interpret any sign of humanity as potential manipulation, and how to use her authority to keep the prison population in line. "Never show weakness," Officer Patterson explained. "The moment they think you're soft, you lose control, and losing control gets you killed." That evening, Olivia went home to her small apartment and found herself unable to shake the memory of David Chun's submissive expression. She had spent years as a counselor trying to empower people, help them find their voices and stand up for themselves. But today, she had experienced what it felt like to be the source of someone else's powerlessness, and the feeling was addictive in a way that scared her. She told herself it was just adrenaline, just the stress of a new job in a challenging environment. Dr. Lawson's hidden cameras had recorded everything, From Olivia as initial compassionate response to Martinez's violence to the subtle changes in her facial expression as she processed Chen as fear and submission. The Stanford Prison Experiment had been shut down after 6 days when ordinary college students transformed into sadistic guards and broken prisoners. Dr. Lawson was testing whether the same psychological transformation would occur in a real prison environment with people who had voluntarily chosen careers in corrections. Olivia's psychological profile had made her perfect for this study. She was intelligent, empathetic, and had a strong moral compass under normal circumstances. If someone like Olivia could be corrupted by the prison environment, it would prove that the Stanford results weren't anomalies caused by artificial conditions, but fundamental truths about human nature when power dynamics became extreme. Dr. Lawson had been tracking Olivia since she applied for the position, knowing that her financial desperation and protective instincts toward her brother would override her ethical concerns about working in corrections. That night, as Olivia tried to fall asleep, she found herself thinking about the other inmates she had encountered during her first day. Most had shown her the same automatic deference they showed all guards, but a few had tested her boundaries with subtle acts of defiance, taking too long to respond to orders, making eye contact for a fraction too long, failing to step aside when she walked past. Olivia realized she was already cataloging these behaviors as challenges to her authority that would need to be addressed. Olivia's transformation had begun exactly as Dr. Lawson had predicted, following the same psychological patterns documented in Stanford and countless other studies of power corruption. The institutional environment was stripping away her civilian identity and replacing it with something darker, more primitive, and ultimately more honest about human nature. As Olivia finally drifted off to sleep, she was already looking forward to tomorrow, when she would have another opportunity to exercise the absolute power that was slowly becoming her addiction. Olivia's second day began with inmate Chen refusing to make eye contact with her, a subtle act of defiance that sent an unexpected surge of anger through her veins. She had helped him yesterday, shown him kindness that none of the other guards would have offered, and now he was treating her with the same sullen resistance he showed everyone else. The ingratitude felt like a personal betrayal, and Olivia found herself wondering if Martinez had been right about these people only understanding force. During morning count, Olivia noticed several inmates testing her boundaries in small ways, shuffling too slowly to their cells, responding to her orders with barely audible mumbles, failing to stand at attention when she walked past. Each tiny act of disrespect chipped away at her patience and fed a growing need to establish her dominance. Officer Patterson, assigned as her mentor, watched her struggle with obvious amusement. "They can smell weakness," he told her. "Right now, they're deciding whether you're a real guard or just a tourist." The breaking point came when inmate Rodriguez, a gang member serving time for assault, deliberately shoulder-checked Olivia as she walked past his cell. The contact was brief and could have been accidental, but the smirk on Rodriguez's face made his intentions clear. Olivia felt her face flush with humiliation as other inmates watched to see how she would respond. Every eye in the block was on her, measuring her reaction. cataloging her as either a threat to be respected or a weakness to be exploited. Olivia surprised herself by grabbing Rodriguez's arm and slamming him against the concrete wall, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as she spoke directly into his ear. "You will treat me with respect, or you will learn what happens when you don't," she said, her words carrying a menace that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primitive inside her. Rodriguez's smirk vanished as he felt the steel in her voice, and Olivia experienced a rush of satisfaction unlike anything she had felt as a counselor helping troubled students. Dr. Lawson observed the interaction from her hidden vantage point, noting how quickly Olivia had adapted to the prison's power structure. The transformation was proceeding exactly as predicted. The institutional environment was stripping away Olivia's civilian identity and replacing it with something more primal and ruthless. The behavioral conditioning was working faster than expected, possibly accelerated by Olivia's financial stress and her desperate need to succeed in this job to support her brother's medical care. That afternoon, Olivia found herself actively looking for reasons to assert her authority. When inmate Williams took too long to return from the bathroom, Olivia wrote him up for delaying count. When inmate Jackson failed to stand immediately when she entered his cell for inspection, she confiscated his personal photos as punishment. Each exercise of power felt more natural than the last, and Olivia began to understand why her colleagues seemed to enjoy their work despite the harsh conditions. The other guards noticed Olivia's evolution with approval. Martinez, who had initially dismissed her as another bleeding-heart liberal who wouldn't last a week, began including her in conversations about problem inmates and effective discipline techniques. "You're learning," he told her during their afternoon break. "Most rookies take months to figure out that kindness is interpreted as weakness in here. You figured it out in 2 days." Olivia's relationship with the inmates had fundamentally shifted. Where yesterday she had seen human beings with complex motivations and troubled histories, today she saw potential threats to her authority that needed to be controlled. The inmates sensed the change in her demeanor and adjusted their behavior accordingly. The subtle challenges stopped. The eye contact became appropriately brief, and the responses to her orders became crisp and immediate. That evening, Olivia called her brother Michael to check on his treatment progress, but found herself distracted by thoughts of work. Michael's gratitude for her financial support and his updates about his improving condition should have been her primary focus. But instead Olivia kept thinking about Rodriguez's expression when she had asserted her dominance. The memory of his fear and respect was more intoxicating than her brother's appreciation, and that realization should have disturbed her more than it did. Dr. Lawson reviewed the day's recordings with growing excitement about her research findings. Olivia's transformation was proceeding according to the Stanford model, but with several interesting variations. The real-world prison environment seemed to accelerate the corruption process, possibly because, unlike the original experiment's artificial prison, Riverside Correctional had genuine consequences for both guards and inmates. The stakes were real, making the power dynamics more intense and the psychological changes more rapid. Olivia spent the evening researching prison management techniques online, telling herself she was just trying to be good at her job. But as she read about psychological control methods, intimidation tactics, and strategies for maintaining inmate compliance, she felt the same dark excitement that had consumed her when Rodriguez submitted to her authority. She was beginning to understand that her compassionate nature hadn't been eliminated, it had been redirected toward her colleagues and away from the inmates who were increasingly seeming less human and more like problems to be managed. As Olivia prepared for bed, she caught herself in the bathroom mirror and was startled by what she saw. Her posture was straighter, more aggressive, and her expression carried a hardness that hadn't been there 2 days ago. The caring high school counselor who had taken this job out of desperation was disappearing, replaced by someone who understood power and wasn't afraid to use it. The transformation was happening so gradually that Olivia didn't recognize how drastically she was changing, but Dr. Lawson's cameras captured every subtle shift in her personality as the corruption process accelerated. Olivia's third day began with an incident that would have horrified her former self, but now filled her with a cold sense of professional satisfaction. Inmate Torres, a small-time drug dealer who had been increasingly sullen during morning inspections, decided to challenge her authority by refusing to stand when she entered his cell. The defiance lasted exactly 3 seconds before Olivia's response made it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated under any circumstances. What happened next surprised even the veteran guards who had been betting on how long Olivia would last before requesting a transfer to a safer department. Instead of calling for backup or following standard disciplinary procedures, Olivia used her voice as a weapon, speaking to Torres in tones so quietly menacing that nearby inmates pressed themselves against their cell walls to avoid becoming collateral damage in the psychological warfare unfolding before them. "Inmate Torres," Olivia said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "You seem to be confused about how this relationship works. Let me help you understand." She stepped closer to his bunk, invading his personal space with the confidence of someone who knew the entire system was designed to support her actions and punish any resistance to her will. Torres, who had spent years on the streets and in various correctional facilities, recognized something dangerous in Olivia's demeanor and immediately stood at attention. But his compliance came too late. Olivia had tasted blood in the water and wasn't finished establishing her dominance. She conducted the most thorough cell inspection Torres had experienced, confiscating personal items for minor infractions and writing violations that would extend his sentence and limit his privileges for months. Dr. Lawson watched the interaction with fascination, noting how Olivia had intuitively discovered the most effective psychological pressure points without any formal training in prisoner control techniques. The transformation was proceeding faster than any previous subject in her research, possibly because Olivia's background in counseling had given her sophisticated understanding of human psychology that she was now weaponizing instead of using for healing. The other inmates had witnessed Torres's humiliation and drew the obvious conclusions about challenging Olivia's authority. Word spread through the block with the efficiency of a prison communication network that the new guard was not to be tested. that she possessed something more dangerous than Martinez's physical violence or Patterson's bureaucratic cruelty. Olivia had discovered how to break people psychologically, and that discovery was intoxicating beyond anything she had previously experienced. During lunch break, Olivia found herself the center of attention among the veteran guards, who were impressed by her rapid adaptation to prison culture. "I've never seen a rookie establish control that fast," Martinez admitted. "Most of them take months to learn what you figured out in 3 days. You've got natural instincts for this work." The praise from her colleagues felt better than any recognition she had received as a counselor, validating her transformation in ways that should have terrified her. Officer Patterson invited Olivia to join the evening shift's cell checks, which she quickly learned was code for after-hours visits to inmates who needed additional attitude adjustment beyond what could be officially documented. These informal sessions were where the real psychological conditioning happened, where problem inmates learned that their compliance was expected at all times, not just when administrators might be watching. Olivia participated in her first unofficial cell check that evening, accompanying Patterson to visit inmate Williams, who had been spreading complaints about guard behavior to other inmates. What transpired in Williams's cell during that 15-minute visit would have been illegal if it had been recorded. But Dr. Lawson's hidden cameras captured every moment of psychological intimidation that followed. Olivia didn't lay a hand on Williams, but she didn't need to. Her words were surgical instruments that dissected his sense of security and left him emotionally devastated. The power Olivia wielded during that encounter was unlike anything she had experienced in her previous career. As a counselor, she had helped people find strength and resilience, but that work required patience, empathy, and respect for others' autonomy. As a guard, she could achieve immediate results through fear and intimidation. Watching grown men crumble under pressure, she controlled completely. The instant gratification was addictive, and Olivia found herself craving more opportunities to exercise her newfound abilities. That night, Olivia called her brother Michael with news about her job going well, but she found herself unable to explain why she was succeeding so dramatically. How could she tell him that she had discovered a talent for psychological manipulation, that she was becoming someone who broke people's spirits with the same efficiency she had once used to heal them? Michael's innocent questions about her work made Olivia realize how far she had traveled from the person she had been just 3 days earlier. Dr. Lawson reviewed the evening's footage with growing excitement about her research implications. Olivia's transformation was providing unprecedented data about how quickly institutional power could corrupt even the most ethical individuals. The Stanford Prison Experiment had been criticized for its artificial conditions and college-age subjects, but Olivia's case proved that the psychological mechanisms were even more powerful in real-world settings with genuine consequences and professional stakes. As Olivia prepared for bed, she felt a sense of professional accomplishment that was contaminated by something darker and more disturbing. She had found her calling, discovered work that utilized her natural abilities and provided immediate feedback about her effectiveness. The fact that her abilities were now being used to break people rather than heal them should have been cause for moral concern. But instead, Olivia found herself planning how she could become even more effective at maintaining order and control. Olivia's reflection in her bathroom mirror showed someone who had fully adapted to her new environment, whose posture and expression radiated authority and confidence. The desperate woman who had taken this job out of financial necessity was gone, replaced by someone who understood power and wasn't afraid to wield it against anyone who challenged her position. Dr. Lawson's experiment was succeeding beyond her wildest expectations, documenting in real time how quickly power corrupts when the institutional environment supports and rewards that corruption. Olivia's fourth day began with a phone call that would test everything she had become over the past 72 hours. Dr. Rebecca Lawson, no longer disguised as a management consultant, requested a meeting to discuss some concerning observations about guard inmate interactions. Olivia felt a spike of adrenaline that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the predatory instincts she had developed. Someone was challenging her territory, and that could not be allowed. During their meeting in the administrative conference room, Dr. Lawson explained her true identity and the nature of her research, revealing that Olivia had been unknowingly participating in a study designed to document how quickly power corrupts ordinary people. "I've been observing your interactions with inmates," Dr. Lawson explained, "and I'm concerned about the rapid changes in your behavior. You've transformed from a compassionate counselor to someone who uses psychological intimidation as a primary tool of control." Olivia listened to Dr. Lawson's concerns with the kind of calculated patience she had learned to use on difficult inmates, analyzing the psychologist's words for weakness and opportunity, rather than engaging with their moral implications. "Dr. Lawson," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her signature, "what you call psychological intimidation, I call effective prison management. These people understand hierarchy and consequences. My job is to maintain order, and I'm very good at my job." The conversation that followed revealed the extent of Olivia's transformation in ways that shocked even Dr. Lawson, who had expected the corruption process but hadn't anticipated its thoroughness. Olivia defended every action she had taken, reframed every ethical concern as naive misunderstanding of prison realities, and demonstrated a complete inability to recognize her own psychological changes. The empathetic counselor had been entirely consumed by the authoritarian guard. Dr. Lawson presented Olivia with video evidence of her interactions with inmates, showing the progression from her first day's compassion to her current casual cruelty. But instead of experiencing shame or self-recognition, Olivia watched the footage with professional interest, critiquing her technique and identifying areas for improvement. "I can see where I was still too soft in some of these early interactions," she noted. "I've learned to be more decisive since then." The meeting revealed that Dr. Lawson's research had captured something unprecedented in the study of institutional power corruption. Unlike the Stanford Prison Experiment subjects who maintained some awareness of their role-playing, Olivia had completely integrated her guard identity into her core personality. She wasn't acting like a cruel guard, she had become one, so thoroughly that she could no longer access the compassionate person she had been just 4 days earlier. Dr. Lawson attempted to trigger some recognition of Olivia's transformation by discussing her brother, Michael's medical situation and reminding her of the values that had originally motivated her career in counseling. But Olivia's response chilled the psychologist to her core. Michael's condition is exactly why I need to excel in this position. The inmates don't matter. They're just obstacles between me and my brother's treatment. I'll do whatever it takes to succeed here. The institutional environment had not just corrupted Olivia, it had provided her with a complete moral framework that justified any action in service of maintaining control and advancing her career. She had internalized the prison's dehumanization of inmates so completely that she could no longer see them as people deserving of basic human dignity. They were problems to be managed, threats to be neutralized, and sources of professional satisfaction when properly controlled. That afternoon, Olivia returned to her duties with a new awareness of being observed, but no inclination to modify her behavior. If anything, knowing that her effectiveness was being documented filled her with professional pride. She conducted her rounds with the confidence of someone who had found their true calling, noting with satisfaction how inmates now automatically displayed the deference she had learned to command through psychological manipulation. Dr. Lawson spent the evening reviewing her research data with growing alarm about the implications of her findings. The Stanford Prison Experiment had been terminated early because of ethical concerns about the harm being done to participants. But Olivia's transformation was happening in a real prison with real consequences, and there was no ethical oversight committee that could shut down the ongoing damage to both guards and inmates who were living within this corrupted system. The most disturbing aspect of Olivia's case was how quickly she had lost the ability to recognize her own moral deterioration. The institutional environment hadn't just changed her behavior, it had altered her fundamental capacity for ethical reasoning. She had become someone who could inflict psychological harm without guilt, who could rationalize cruelty as necessity, and who derived genuine satisfaction from exercising power over vulnerable people. Olivia ended her fourth day by calling her brother Michael, but their conversation revealed how completely her priorities had shifted. Instead of focusing on his medical progress, she found herself talking about her professional success, her growing reputation among the veteran guards, and her plans for advancement within the correctional system. Michael's concerns about her increasingly cold tone went unheard because Olivia was no longer capable of recognizing how fundamentally she had changed. Dr. Lawson faced an ethical dilemma that highlighted the dangers of studying power corruption in real-world settings. Her research was generating valuable data about human psychology under institutional pressure, but it was also documenting the systematic destruction of both Olivia's moral compass and the dignity of countless inmates who were subjected to her increasingly sophisticated methods of psychological control. The experiment had succeeded too well, creating a monster that the prison system would continue to reward and promote. As Olivia prepared for her 5th day of work, she felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had found their true nature and embraced it completely. The transformation that had begun with desperate financial need had evolved into something far more sinister, a complete moral inversion that turned her greatest strengths as a counselor into weapons for psychological warfare. Dr. Lawson's cameras would capture what happened next, but the ethical framework that might have prevented it had been systematically eroded by the same institutional forces that had corrupted Olivia beyond recognition. Olivia's fifth day at Riverside Correctional began with news that would have devastated her former self, but now filled her with cold determination. Her brother Michael had been admitted to the hospital with complications from his treatment, and the medical bills would require her to not only keep her current position but excel within the prison system to access higher-paying supervisory roles. What should have been a moment of personal crisis instead became the final catalyst that completed her transformation into someone unrecognizable from the woman who had walked through these doors less than a week ago. Dr. Lawson observed Olivia's response to the family emergency with clinical fascination and growing horror. Instead of requesting time off or showing emotional distress, Olivia immediately began calculating how she could leverage the situation to demonstrate her commitment to the institution. She volunteered for overtime shifts, offered to cover for colleagues, and suggested implementing new inmate management protocols that would showcase her leadership potential to the administration. The morning brought a situation that would define Olivia's complete moral collapse. Inmate Davidson, a middle-aged man serving time for embezzlement, had received news that his own daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia. His emotional breakdown in the common area created exactly the kind of disturbance that guards were expected to handle swiftly and decisively. But Davidson's situation mirrored Olivia's own family medical crisis in ways that should have triggered empathy. Instead, Olivia saw Davidson's grief as a challenge to institutional order that required immediate correction. She approached him with the calm efficiency of a predator who had identified vulnerable prey, using his emotional vulnerability as a psychological weapon to reassert control. "Your personal problems don't matter in here," she told him with surgical coldness. "Your only concern is following orders and maintaining proper behavior. Everything else is a distraction from your responsibilities as an inmate." Dr. Lawson watched in stunned silence as Olivia systematically destroyed Davidson's emotional defenses, using her counseling background to identify exactly which psychological pressure points would cause maximum damage. The woman who had once helped troubled students process difficult emotions was now weaponizing those same skills to break a man who was experiencing the same kind of family crisis that had driven her to take this job in the first place. The other inmates witnessed Davidson's psychological demolition with the kind of horror reserved for watching someone cross a line from which there could be no return. Olivia had demonstrated that no human suffering was sacred, that any vulnerability would be exploited, and that the institutional hierarchy she represented was more important than basic human dignity. The message was clear: abandon all hope of being treated as human beings, because even tragedy would be used against them. Davidson's breakdown accelerated into complete psychological collapse as Olivia continued her assault on his emotional stability. When he fell to his knees sobbing about his daughter's condition, Olivia wrote him up for disruptive behavior and recommended solitary confinement as punishment for his inability to control his grief. The other guards watched with a mixture of admiration and unease, recognizing that Olivia had crossed into territory that even their hardened sensibilities found disturbing. Dr. Lawson realized she was witnessing something beyond the scope of her original research. The Stanford Prison Experiment had shown how institutional roles could corrupt behavior, but Olivia's transformation represented a complete personality replacement that seemed to be permanent rather than situational. She had not simply adopted cruel behaviors, she had become someone fundamentally different at her core. Someone who derived genuine satisfaction from inflicting psychological pain on vulnerable people. That evening, Olivia received a call from the hospital about Michael's deteriorating condition and the urgent need for additional treatment funding. Her response crystallized everything she had become over the past 5 days. Instead of rushing to his bedside or expressing concern about his welfare, she immediately began planning how to use his crisis to advance her career within the correctional system. Michael's suffering had become just another resource to be exploited in service of her professional ambitions. Olivia's conversation with Michael revealed the complete extinction of her former self. When he expressed fear about his prognosis and asked for her emotional support, she responded with the same cold efficiency she used on inmates. "Michael, your emotions aren't helping either of us right now. I need you to focus on getting better so I can concentrate on advancing my career to pay for your treatment. Everything else is irrelevant." Dr. Lawson's research had captured something unprecedented in the study of power. Corruption, the complete moral inversion of someone who had genuinely cared about helping others. Olivia hadn't just been corrupted by institutional power. She had been transformed into someone who used her greatest strengths as weapons against the most vulnerable people in her environment. The counseling skills that had once brought healing now brought devastation with surgical precision. The institutional environment had provided Olivia with everything she needed to rationalize her transformation. The prison system rewarded her cruelty with professional recognition. Her colleagues praised her effectiveness, and her financial desperation gave her moral cover for abandoning every ethical principle she had once held sacred. She had found a way to be successful by becoming someone who would have horrified her former self, but she no longer possessed the moral framework necessary to recognize the magnitude of her transformation. As Olivia prepared for her 6th day at Riverside Correctional, she felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had found their true calling and embraced it completely. The desperate woman who had taken this job to help her sick brother was gone, replaced by someone who saw human suffering as a professional opportunity and psychological vulnerability as a tool to be exploited. Dr. Lawson's cameras had documented the most rapid and complete case of power corruption ever recorded, but they had also captured the birth of a monster that the system would continue to reward and promote. Olivia's story stands as a terrifying reminder that power doesn't just corrupt. It can completely erase the people we once were, replacing them with versions of ourselves that we would never have imagined possible. In just 5 days, she had traveled from compassionate healer to psychological predator, proving that the capacity for evil exists within ordinary people when institutional environments provide the right combination of power, pressure, and moral justification for abandoning our humanity. Dr. Lawson's research would go on to revolutionize understanding of how quickly institutions can corrupt even the most ethical individuals. But it came at the cost of documenting the complete moral destruction of someone who had once dedicated her life to helping others heal. The Stanford Prison Experiment had been stopped after 6 days to protect its participants. But Olivia's transformation had occurred in a real prison where there was no researcher with the power to call halt, no ethical oversight to prevent the systematic destruction of both guards and inmates caught within a system designed to reward cruelty and punish compassion. If Olivia's terrifying transformation from healer to predator in just 5 days has opened your eyes to how quickly power can corrupt even the most ethical people, please subscribe for more psychological stories that reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature. Share this with someone who needs to understand how institutional environments can systematically destroy moral reasoning. And comment below about which moment in Olivia's journey disturbed you most. Your engagement helps these important stories reach people who need to recognize the warning signs of power corruption before it's too late to maintain their humanity.